Okay, good evening, everyone. My name is David Cashman with SEB Housing, and this is the information session for the 2 affordable units at the Bradford Lookout Marketplace and Flats in Plymouth. Purpose of this evening is to give anyone watching a little bit more background information about the units, about this opportunity, how to apply, what the lottery, how the lottery is going to work, and what to expect going forward. The goal is to provide whatever information people want, and so to that end, if anyone watching has a question, please don't hesitate to ask, and I'd be happy to stop and answer the question. I'm the only one who can speak out loud. However, there is a chat box to the right of the screen where you see me. I'm going to type something there now. And if at any point anyone has a question, please feel free to write it there. So let me just type something there now. There's also simultaneously a conference call, so if anyone's watching would prefer to call in instead, you can call the number, which is, I'll write that down too. So you can call in too if you'd prefer. So just to give a little bit of background, SEB Housing is an off-site affordable housing consulting group. We're located in Needham, non-Plymouth. So we've been hired by the development team to help them move through this process and to market the affordable units and to run a lottery for the affordable units. But we're not actually on site. We're not a management team. And so as we'll talk about later in this process, you'll see how your first point of contact, if you're interested in this opportunity, will really be with us. And your application will be submitted to us. And if you have questions about the process and the eligibility requirements, those will come to us. But then at some point after the lottery, the main point of contact will really be McGreico, which is the management team, as they'll be the ones on site and they can process households for lease eligibility and all that comes with that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more later in the presentation. But so just to have sort of an idea, there are kind of 2 different groups involved in the process. We've been hired by McGreico, which is the management team, and we'll be sort of the first point of contact. And then later on in the process, they will become the main point of contact as households go to apply for leases. So let me just give you a little bit of background information about the development. So there are 4 commercial spaces, a mixed-use space. 4 of the spaces are commercial spaces, and there are 24 residential apartments in a mix of 1-bedroom and 2-bedroom offerings. This development is located right across from Plymouth Harbor in the downtown Harbor District. So it's a great location, seems to me. You're literally right on the harbor. You could practically throw a stone into it, it looks like. You're also pretty close to Route 3A and to Route 3. So if you need to get to points north or south, that's close by. Looks like you've got some different shops and restaurants, and there's a museum there. There's some green space there. So it looks to be a wonderful location and a brand new development. This development does allow pets. There's parking on site. And as I said before, 2 of the units total will be made affordable through this process. Those 2 units, one of them is a 1-bedroom, 1-bath unit, a little over 900 square feet. And the rent for that unit is $1,844 per month. And the other unit is a 2-bedroom, 2-bath unit, also a little over 900 square feet, and the rent for that unit is $2,036. Now, just so you know, these units have been approved by both the town and the state, and they are indistinguishable from other market rate units in the development from the exterior. So no one walking through the building could point out an affordable unit from a market rate unit. They're all to look the same, and both the state and town have agreed that these units are fairly selected and fairly represent the units as a whole in the development. And so you can rest assured that they're not sort of clumped together or identifiable in some way. The rents I mentioned, please keep in mind that those rents are the rents, and they don't change based on any applicant's particular financial circumstances. So this is not the type of, there are certain affordable housing programs where rents, your portion of rent as an applicant may fluctuate depending on your financial picture. Outside of voucher holders, that's not the case in this program. The rents are the rents, even for one applicant who may make, substantially more money than another applying applicant. In addition, those rents do not include utilities. Tenants will be responsible for utilities, which are, looks like everything's electric. So you pay general electric costs, and that includes heat, cooking, and hot water. However, water and sewer costs are included in the rent, and both affordable units will have access to a free parking spot on site. And if you're curious, generally rents are tied to a formula that is reflects the area median incomes that are published by HUD every year in April. And Plymouth is part of the Boston, Cambridge, Quincy geographic area. There are dozens and dozens and dozens of towns and communities that are in that area. And what that means is that rents can change, not in the middle of a lease, but generally once a year they can change. Never in the middle of a lease, but and usually they go up, not a huge amount, but they typically go up each year. But again, rents are based on a formula tied to the area median incomes published by HUD. They're not tied to any particular applicant's financial picture. Now, to qualify for this opportunity, households need to have income and assets that meet the program guidelines. Keep in mind as well, and we'll talk more about this later, that for the 2-bedroom unit, household size will have some impact on the waiting list and on the order of priority that households will get for that unit. It's not quite as simple as whoever is picked first in the lottery is going to be higher up for the 2-bedroom unit. We have to give priority for larger households who need both bedrooms. We'll talk about that more. Any applying household cannot own a home upon move-in. So all homes must be sold before a household can lease a unit. Now, you can own the home now, right? So if you're sitting there watching this and you own a home, that's okay. You can apply. You need to disclose information about the value of your current home and the debt you have on the property. But it's okay that you own it now. You would just need to sell it before you signed a lease. And when you applied, if you otherwise meet all of the eligibility criteria, you would get a notice from us that says you're conditionally approved. You meet all of the eligibility criteria, except for the fact that you own a home right now. And so before you sign a lease, you're going to need to provide proof that you have sold that home. So keep that in mind. And then finally, households or their families cannot have a financial interest in the development, which I don't think comes up often, but if you have any money tied up in this project, stand to benefit financially, that would be a disqualifying factor. Relatedly, and perhaps a little bit more commonly, if a household is considered a related party, and that usually means that they are an employee or a directly related to someone on the management or development team, which is MGRYCO or MEGRYCO. I'm not quite sure where the emphasis is, but MGRYCO. So if you work for them or, you're related to someone who works there, that's something you would need to disclose on your application, and it would probably disqualify you. And the reason for that is to avoid the, appearance of impropriety, the appearance that someone might be getting disparate or more beneficial treatment based on that relationship. And so you need to disclose that, and we could let you know. I should note as well that both of these units are built out with features for persons with mobility impairment. Okay, they're both considered fully disabled accessible units, which means they are going to have some of those features. and which also means that any households who need those features, who have a mobility impairment, a document would get priority for those units. Okay. Now, do you have to have a documented disability to be able to rent one of these units? No, you don't. You just need to understand that any households who do need the special features would be higher on the waiting list, i.e. would get first opportunity compared to any households who don't need the features, who don't need the features. So let's talk about the biggest criteria for qualifying for this program, which is households need to meet the maximum income limits. And again, I actually should have said this earlier, but really everything that I'm reviewing in this information session is stuff that's contained in our information packet, which is available on our website. So please don't hesitate if you haven't gone there already. And our website is www.sebhousing.com. Just type that into the chat box. If you go there under Affordable Housing Opportunities, then click I Want to Rent. You'll see the icon for the Bradford Lookout Marketplace and Flats in Plymouth. You can click that, and then you'll find not only the information packet, but also the application. Those are downloadable from our website if you don't have an application in hand already, and you can fill it out. I recommend that even if you've watched this information session, you should still take a look at the information packet. I won't be able to cover absolutely everything that's in there during the session, and there is a lot of useful and pertinent information in that document that I recommend you take a look at. I think a lot of very common questions that people have are answered in that document. So take a look. And as well, I'll be talking about income limits, and I'll be talking about certain numbers, particularly. And so, though everything that I'm going to be talking about is in the information packet. So point is, you don't have to be writing these down. You don't have to be trying to memorize the income limits or the minimum incomes to talk about. It's all in the information packet. It's in the application. It's on our website. So just take a look. To be eligible for this opportunity, households must be under the maximum income limits. That probably comes as no surprise. These are affordable units being offered at prices that are substantially less than their market rate equivalents in the same development, and therefore, to qualify for one of these units, you have to be under certain income limits. That probably is, that seems sort of intuitive. And those income limits are, for a household size of 1, it's $70,750. For a household size of 2, it's $80,850. For a household size of 3, it's $90,950. And for a household size of 4, it's $101,050. Don't need to write that down. It's all available. Those numbers change every year, okay? So they'll probably change again in about 5 months from now, but as of right now, those are the income limits. Now, that is gross income for all members of the applying household. And household means everyone who will be on the lease and everyone who will be living there as their primary residence. Okay, everyone who's going to be on the lease or everyone who would be living there as their primary residence. It's gross income, not net income for W-2 employees, so not after deductions or anything like that. It is the gross income that we're talking about and applying towards those standards. Now, if you're self-employed, and many households are these days, that's a little bit different, and you'd have to fill out a profit and loss statement in our application. And in that case, we're not just looking at your profit to apply towards those maximum income limits. We have to factor in the costs of doing business and some of those expenses, and those get taken out. So that really effectively is closer to sort of a net income that we're applying towards those income limits. But for W-2 employees who have an employer, we're looking at your gross income and applying that towards the income limit. And in general, like I said, we're including the income of everyone in the household, with a few exceptions being income from minors. We don't count that, nor do we count income from full-time students who are dependents over $480. Okay, So we don't count the income of minors. We don't count the income from full-time students who are dependents over $480. So if you have a child who's in school full-time and they happen to be a real go-getter, and on the side they have a job and they make $10,000 a year in that job, we are only counting $480 of that. The rest we do not count towards the income limit. Please just keep in mind too that really not up to households to decide what should and does count as income. Include everything that's asked for in the application, and SEB will let you know what does and doesn't count. So, for example, if you did have a child who was a full-time student and they made $10,000 a year, you still need to provide all that documentation. Even though only $480 of it is counting, you still need to provide the relevant documentation that we ask for. When you fill out the application, you'll notice on page 7 there's an income table, which is broken down for all the different household members and the sources of income and the gross monthly income that they have. I'd recommend that you take your time going through that table. That table is there in large part for your benefit, in part because in this program, income is defined pretty broadly and may include things that you don't necessarily think of as income. And so it's there to guide households, to show you all of the different things that can and do count as income in this program. And that way you don't overlook something and possibly think, hey, I'm definitely eligible. Meanwhile, you've totally overlooked, some substantial income source that you have, leading to a false sense. So, the obvious one is the most obvious source of income is the money you make from your job, your employer, and we certainly ask about that, but there are other ones too, like if you're self-employed, you have a little side business, that would count as well. If you receive child support or alimony or Social Security income, or Social Security disability income, if you are drawing down regularly from a retirement funds, or you receive unemployment compensation, perhaps you receive periodic payments from friends or family, that one actually does come up with some regularity, and it's certainly one I think that surprises people sometimes. But if you're receiving regular assistance, maybe you have an uncle or an aunt who provides monthly amounts, maybe, that's great. That would count as income if it's frequent and recurring. You may have assets that generate income. Checking accounts generate income, not a whole lot, but like certificates of deposit, where you provide the money to the bank for a longer period of time. Maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's a year. Those provide higher rates of return, and those get counted, the money that the asset generates. And you may have some other entirely different source of income as well. So go through the income table closely. Again, it's sort of there for your benefit to help guide you as far as what all the different sources of income are. And then later in the application, you'll see exactly what we need for each income source. So, for your job, you're going to need to provide the copies of your 5 most recent consecutive pay stubs. If you had a job and you've since left that job, you're going to have to provide documentation that you've left that job, so we know not to count that anymore. So that's income. I think everything that you need to know is hopefully in the application, but certainly if anything is unclear or you have questions, you can always reach out to us, and we'd be happy to go through it with you. I know that oftentimes we don't always know exactly what our questions are until we've kind of started going through something in detail, and that's totally fine. If that happens to you and you realize what your question is as you're going along, that's what we're here for. So reach out. We'd be happy to work with you. Now, in this program, there's no minimum income, okay? But the leasing office wants to make, it's not subsidized housing, okay? And so the leasing office wants to know that households are going to be able to meet their lease screening criteria, that they have sufficient income and assets to be able to pay the rent each month. And so for that reason, we do perform a more limited minimum income screening analysis for anyone who doesn't have a voucher, okay? For anyone who doesn't have a voucher. If you do have a voucher, there is no minimum income screening. You can ignore what I'm saying. But if you don't have a voucher, we will do a more limited screening to make sure that you meet the leasing office's minimum income screening criteria. And this is something that they apply to both affordable and market rate applicants. Okay, so there isn't any different treatment going on here. There's the same analysis that they do for all applicants. And the ratio that they use is the same for all applicants. And that ratio is 40%. So to meet their criteria, an applicant has to make about 2.5 times the monthly rent in income. Now, if you have substantial liquid assets, that's something that they can consider as well. So you might be under the minimum income threshold, but if you have substantial savings that you can draw from, that might put you back up over the threshold. Now, when we talked about maximum income limits, we talked, those were based on the number of people in the applying household. Okay, so for a household size of 1, it was $70,750. For a household size of 2, it was $80,850, etc. But for the minimum income screening criteria, it's based on the unit size that you're applying for, not the number of people in your household. And so for a 1-bedroom unit, to meet the minimum income screening criteria, a household has to make a little over $55,000. And for a 2-bedroom unit, a household would need to make a little over $61,000. Okay, again, these don't apply to anyone who has a voucher. They are not subject to this screening. That's what the voucher is for. So what that means is that, in effect, in this program, eligible households will be ones who sort of fit into a window where they make over the minimum income screening criteria, but less than the maximum income limit. So they're within this window. Okay, if you're too low, you don't meet the minimum income screening criteria. If you're too high, you're not program eligible. You make too much. And the size of that window will depend in part on which unit size you're applying for, and also how many people are in your household. For example, a 2-person household applying for a 1-bedroom unit is going to, again, if they don't have a voucher, have to be somewhere between $55,000 and $80,000. But a 2-person household applying for a 2-bedroom unit is going to have to be somewhere between $61,000 and $80,000. So the size of that window depends on the unit size that you're applying for and the number of persons in your household. I should say as well that when we're doing an income calculation, we are, per the program requirements, we are projecting forward over the next 12 months using what you have made most recently as the best evidence of what you are likely to make moving forward. I recognize that determination is somewhat uncertain. It's impossible to say exactly what anyone's going to make in the future. However, what you've been making most recently is the best predictor that we have for what you will make going forward. And that's why we're asking about things like your recent tax returns, last year's tax returns, and your 5 most consecutive pay stubs, etc. And so in general, what that means is that we have to assume what you've been making is what you will continue to make unless there's documented evidence otherwise. So a household who's made $80,000 as demonstrated on their 2020 tax returns and who's on pace to make $80,000 in 2021 based on their 5 most recent consecutive pay stubs, who says, yeah, but I think I'm going to work less next year and I'm going to cut back. We can't accept that. Everything in your history suggests $80,000. We have to assume you'll continue to make $80,000 moving forward. Now, if there's something you can point to, like you made $80,000 because there was a bonus structure and you received that bonus in 2020 and 2021, and you have documented evidence from your employer saying that that bonus structure is being completely eliminated and will no longer be available in 2022, that's a little bit different. That's something that we might be able to consider. But general statements of, I expect to make less next year, are not sufficient for SEB to discount what you've historically been making this year and last year. And similarly, this happens sometimes too. Households will show on their 5 most recent consecutive pay stubs overtime. And we generally have to consider that similar amounts of overtime will be worked moving forward. And household statements of, well, I'm not going to work overtime anymore, are usually not the type of statements that we can accept to no longer factor in the amount that was made in overtime, unless perhaps the employer says that overtime will absolutely positively never be allowed again in the future, which is probably unlikely, but something like that might create an exception to this general rule. I think that's it on income. There's plenty more to read on income in the informational materials, and if you have questions, that's what we're here for, so reach on out. You do also have to provide information relative to your assets. Now, please keep in mind there's no asset limit. Okay, there's no asset limit in affordable rental opportunities. For homeownership, there is, but for rentals, there isn't. And so households can have quite a bit in assets and still be eligible for this program. Now, you still have to provide documentation relative to your assets. And perhaps the biggest implication of assets is that assets can generate income on their own. Okay, and the income that the asset generates does get counted towards the income limit. But you'll need to provide documentation relative to your assets, which can include things like your checking account, your savings account, if you use Venmo or PayPal or any of those cash apps. If you have a certificate of deposit where you at a bank where you give them money for 6 months or a year and you can't touch it, that generates income, and that is also an asset that we need documentation for. You might have a savings bond, you might have a 401k or an IRA. You might say, well, I'm not going to touch it for 30 more years. It still counts as an asset. We need documentation relative to the value of that asset. But again, there's no asset limit, so that's not going to put you over any limit. And you might have mutual funds, stocks, bonds. Again, we need to see information on the name and the number of shares, and if it generates interest or dividends, which again, those would be counted towards the income limits. Capital gains are not. And the big one is real estate. If you own property, we need to know about that. Again, you can own property at the time of application. It must be sold before you're permitted to sign a lease. So you would need to sell it at some point moving forward if you're going to move forward with this opportunity. Sometimes households will ask, do I have to be a resident of the town of Plymouth to apply? Absolutely not. You don't even have to be a resident of the state of Massachusetts. You could be a resident of California or anywhere, or even a different country. You can still apply and still have equal opportunity to move forward at this development. So I think that's as much as I'm going to say about income and assets. There's plenty there, but reach out if you have questions as you're going through the application. I want to make a few points about the application itself when you're filling it out. One of the first questions will ask you about bedroom size that you're applying for. You can apply for either or both, and there's no downside to applying for both. You don't sort of decrease your chances for one by applying for both. There's really no downside. Maybe you only qualify for a 1-bedroom and not a 2-bedroom. Okay, well, that's not such a big deal. You know that from having applied, and we can let you know. Or you qualify for both, and you ultimately have an opportunity for both after the lottery, and then you just have to make a decision which one you want. But that's not so bad either. There's questions on whether you have a voucher, and that's mostly there so that we know if we have to apply any minimum income screening criteria or not. You have to list all the household members. Again, anyone who's going to be on the lease or living in the unit. You'll have to fill out what household type you are. You can either be a type 2 household or a type 1 household. And you might say, well, what does that mean? Type 2 household, type 1 household. Well, The number corresponds to the number of bedrooms that the program says a household of your type is appropriate for or needs. So if you're a household type 2, that means you're a household that the program says needs 2 bedrooms or is appropriately sized for 2 bedrooms. And if you're a type 1 household, that means that you are a household who the program would say is appropriately sized or needs 1 bedroom. And you might say, well, what's the relevance of that? And the relevance of that is when we do the lottery, type 2 households will get priority for the 2-bedroom unit above type 1 households. And that's because the program would say that a type 1 household is overhoused in a 2-bedroom unit. They might like it, they don't need it. And they want to make sure that this scarce resource goes to households who need all of the bedrooms. So on the 2-bedroom waiting list, independent of where you're picked in the lottery, okay, I repeat, independent of where you're picked in the lottery, on the 2-bedroom list, type 2 households, bigger households, are going to be above type 1 households. And also any households who need the features of these units, because they both are built out with features for persons with mobility impairments, they're also going to be on the tops of both waiting lists. Okay. So when you fill out your application, you submit it to SEB. I think one of the most important takeaways is if after watching this you think you're interested in this opportunity, get your application in early. There's no downside to doing so. The worst that happens, and this happens with most applications, is we review it and 2 or 3 days later we write back to you and say thanks for your application. It looks like the following documents are still outstanding. And then you go collect those and you submit them back to us, and maybe you've got everything or maybe you don't. And if you don't, then we, 2 or 3 days later, we write back again and we say thanks again. And now we're just missing these items. Please follow up and get those into us. And usually the process has to, go back and forth a few times before households submit everything. And the reason for that is because there is a lot of documentation that's required. You'll see the application is pretty extensive with the amount of documents that we need to see. That's not because we're voyeuristic, we're trying to make this difficult or anything like that. We are just requesting what the program says we have to look at to make a meaningful assessment of households' eligibility for this opportunity. So please keep that in mind when you're applying. We're not trying to make this more difficult. We're just asking for the documents that the program says we need to review. And keep in mind that, like I said, get the application in early, because the vast majority of households need a few tries to get everything in. And that's also because even if you give us absolutely everything that's listed in the application, sometimes submission of one document actually leads to additional questions. So, for example, you might give us your 3 most recent bank statements like we need and say, okay, I've checked that off the list. I gave them exactly what they wanted. And then we review it and we say, hey, thanks for the bank statements. We see X amount of dollars coming in every month from your job, but we also see all these other deposits that we can't tie to a job or anything else that you've told us about. What are all of these deposits that we can't tie to your job? And we need explanation on that. So now you have to go back and get some of those documents. So not always, but for that reason, again, you want to get it in early so that you're not scrambling to get any outstanding documents at the 11th hour. So that kind of covers submitting an incomplete application. If you submit an application you're not eligible, we'll let you know that, and we'll let you know the reasons. And if you submit an application you are eligible, we'll send you a lottery application number and a letter. Please take some time to review that letter to make sure that the information that we put in there is accurate and consistent with what you think you put in your application. So it'll have items like how many people did you list on your application, what household type are you, did you indicate that you needed the features, that you have a mobility impairment and that you actually need the features of the unit, which unit or units did you apply for. So just take a moment to look through that and make sure that what we put is consistent with what you think you put. It will also have your lottery application number if you're eligible, and that will be in the form of A.blank blank blank, and the blank 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 is merely the order in which we received your totally complete application relative to other applicants. It doesn't have any other meaning besides that. So applicant A.001 is simply the very first applicant who submitted a 100% complete application to us, but it doesn't have any bearing on the lottery or one's likelihood to get a unit or to move forward. The application deadline is December 17th, so a little over a month. And then the lottery will be held on January 3rd, 2022, so pretty early on in the new year. And it will be conducted similar to how we're doing it right now. So it will be virtually, and households can tune in or they can call in. They don't have to. Everyone's going to get the results at the same time. Now, you might be scratching your head and saying, well, how can that be? How would we get the results at the same time if someone's watching and someone else isn't watching? And the reason for that is because when we do these lotteries, they're a little bit different than what most people think of when they think of lotteries. So typically in lotteries, we think of winners and losers. We think of who gets picked and who doesn't get picked. But in these lotteries, everyone gets picked. Okay, so everyone who's eligible for this opportunity will have a lottery application number, and every lottery application number will get picked. Okay, and so we'll do one big drawing, and all the numbers will be put into a box, and I'll pull them out one by one, and I'll show them up to the screen. But in that drawing, I've literally included everyone who is eligible for the lottery without regard to their household type or which bedroom size they applied for or whether they need the features, the mobility features or not. Everyone's just kind of put in there together. And so, as I said before, you know, a type 1 household applying for a 2-bedroom unit is not going to be first on that waiting list. And so what that means is that when I'm doing the actual lottery drawing in real time, I don't know exactly where anyone's going to be on the waiting list in the moment I do the drawing. And you don't probably either, okay? Because as I said, everyone's just lumped in there together and pulled out, okay? But later on that evening or very first thing the next day, we'll sort the results and create the waiting lists, and the waiting list will be established, will be ordered top to bottom in the order of priority that households have. So the top household, the number 1 household on the 1-bedroom list is going to be the household with the first opportunity for the 1-bedroom unit, and the number 1 household on the 2-bedroom list is going to be the household with the top priority, the first choice for the 2-bedroom unit. Okay, so you will get those waiting lists either the night of the lottery or the next morning, and so at that point, everyone will know exactly where they stand relative to other households who were in the lottery. And like I said, everyone will be on the waiting list that they applied and were eligible for. So if you applied for both the 1-bedroom and the 2-bedroom units, and we sent you a lottery application number and letter that said you're eligible for both, then you'll be on both waiting lists. You'll probably have different spots on the waiting list, but you'll be on both. And if you were only eligible for the 1-bedroom, you'll just be on the 1-bedroom list. And if you're only eligible for the 2-bedroom, you'll just be on the 2-bedroom list. Okay, so I'm not discouraging anyone from tuning into the lottery. You certainly should if you're interested. I'm merely preparing you for the fact that in the moment that I'm doing the drawing, it can be a little hard to decipher exactly what it means. And that's, again, because all of the households are kind of just being put in there together and drawn out. And it's not until we apply the required priorities and create the waiting list that you know exactly where you stand vis-a-vis other households in the lottery. If you're curious how those waiting lists will get constructed and where the priorities will be, take a look at the information packet. You can look at page 12, and that'll show you exactly how we'll end up creating the waiting lists from the lottery drawing. Now, again, so you know, everyone will be advised of the waiting list and sent the waiting list at the same time. Those won't use your name. They'll just use your lottery application number, so everyone's information will be anonymous. And then at that point, you kind of transition into step 2 of this process. And at that point, SEB kind of takes a step back, and lottery applicants begin to work directly with Megrico. the management team in completing lease applications and looking at units, doing property tours, and things of that nature. Keep in mind, SCB Housing is not doing lease screening. Okay, we are not doing lease screening. We perform a program eligibility review. So when we've put you in the lottery, all that's saying is you are eligible for the program. It is not any indication of your eligibility for a lease, which is a totally separate and distinct process that SCB is frankly not involved in. So if you're number one on the waiting list for a one-bedroom unit, don't go telling your current landlord, hey, I'm moving out, I'm moving to the Bradford, I'm number one on the waiting list, and that means I'm getting a unit. Okay, don't do that yet, because there's still a distinct and separate analysis and screening that has to happen with the management team. So the next step after the lottery is the management team will invite the top households from each waiting list to apply for a lease. And at that time, they'll just, look at things like your credit and your tenant history probably, and if you have any criminal background and things of that nature that they do for all households, whether affordable or market rate. They want to know, like any management team, who's going to be living in their units and making sure that any household who's going to be living in their units meets their lease screening criteria. Okay. That lease screening process is, I think, quite a bit less involved and less time consuming than being deemed program eligible with SCB, which I think is going to be quite a bit more paperwork. So that should be an easier, less time consuming effort, but still an important one, and one that's going to happen. And then if a household meets the lease screening criteria, great, they can set a date for moving into the unit, and great. Sometimes households don't meet the lease screening criteria, or they change their mind and they decide they don't want to move in, or things happen, right? And so what does that mean? Well, that means that if you are not the number one household on a waiting list, I wouldn't necessarily despair and think, oh, that's too bad, I'm not going to get this unit. Because in fact, oftentimes leasing offices have to invite more households from each waiting list than there are units to actually fill those units. Sometimes they have to invite 3 or 4 or even 5 times as many households to fill the units. Not always, but sometimes. So just as the top households on any waiting list shouldn't assume it a given that they will definitely get the unit, because there's still a lease screening criteria that has to happen, or a lease application process that has to happen. Households who do not have the number one position should not automatically think, oh, too bad, I'm not going to get a unit, because households ahead of them may not end up renting the unit for one reason or another. So you should stay, ready if you're interested, and your time may come. Even if it doesn't, the waiting list, you keep your spot on there. So, if you're number 2 on the 1-bedroom waiting list, and that household, the number 1 household ends up taking that unit and renting it, but 10 months later they decide they're not going to renew and they're going to move on, you're going to be the next household on that waiting list. So, your time, if it doesn't come right after the lottery, could come at some point down the road. So keep that in mind as well. This question comes up sometimes about cosigners or guarantors. They're not allowed in this program. So if you're thinking that you're going to have some cosign on the lease or guarantee it for you, that's not permitted. Okay, so just keep that in mind. I should say as well that our program certification, it does have a time limit. It's not good forever, right? So the fact that we may have qualified a household in December of 2021, and for whatever reason, let's say that household isn't going to move in till December of 2022. Unlikely. I think these units are ready, so you'd probably be moving in way before then. But our certifications are good for 6 months from the lottery. If for any reason you have to move in more than 6 months after the lottery, you'd have to do an update to your file to show that you continue to be eligible for the program. Again, I think that's probably unlikely to happen here, because these units should be ready well before then, and households should be moving in well before 6 months from the lottery date. And so if you're one of the lucky households who gets to rent one of these units, great. And you might be asking yourself, so what happens in future years? What does it look like? What do I need to do? And the answer is, well, you won't need to do anything for a while, okay? But you will need to recertify each year. So each year, if you're going to sign a new lease, you have to demonstrate that you're still eligible for the program. And I recognize that that's maybe not the most welcome news for affordable tenants, thinking, oh, I don't want to go through that process again. It's a lot of paperwork. It's a lot of documentation. It takes time. I get that, but it is required. On the other hand, you will have done it already, so you kind of know what's required. And also, if you just kind of keep a file throughout the year and update it, then when it comes time to complete that process again, you've kind of got everything you need, and hopefully that makes the process much less painful than the first time around. So I do recommend sort of having a file and just kind of continually updating it throughout the year so that you have what you need. The other good thing about recertification is that the income limits go way up. They go up by 140%. So you may still be eligible for the program, even if your income's gone up quite a bit. So just as an example, again, this is all on the information packet, so you need to write any of this down. But, to initially be eligible, a household size of 1 can make up to $70,750. That same household, if they're going to recertify a year down the road, can make up to about $99,000. So there's almost a $30,000 window added in where you're still eligible to recertify. If for whatever reason, if you go over that $99,000, okay, and this does happen sometimes too, you could stay in your unit, okay, but you wouldn't be entitled to the affordable rent anymore. You'd have to pay the market rate rent. So if on recertification, you're now making $110,000, you had a great year in 2022 and your income's gone up quite a bit, you could stay in that unit, but you would be doing so at market rate rents, and then the property would find a similar unit of the same number of bedrooms that's a market rate unit, and they'd make that into an affordable unit so that they always have 2 affordable units at the property. If you add household members during the term of your lease, you'll have to also undergo an income certificate, a program certification. Okay, so just keep that in mind. That happens sometimes. Households will be, it's John Smith, he moves in, and 3 months down the road, he says, I want to add another household member. That would be an instance where the new household composition of 2 persons would have to undergo a new program certification to make sure that they remain eligible as a 2-person household. So I think that's about it. Again, anyone watching, if you think you're interested in this opportunity, my sort of two pieces of advice are: get your application in early. There's no downside to submitting it early, even if it's incomplete. At least that way you kind of know where you stand and you know exactly what's missing. You're not guessing at all, and you give yourself some time to gather the documents that are missing. And also just, take a look through the information packet. I tried to cover what I think are the most salient points during tonight's session, but there is more in there than I did cover, and I think it's worthwhile to take a quick read through there. There's a lot of common questions that come up that are answered in the information packet. It's also totally okay if when you start completing an application, if you have questions, that's what we're here for. You can, best way to contact us is email, and that's info@sebhousing.com. I'll write that down here. So the best way to contact us is info@sebhousing.com. We try and get back to everyone within a business day with an answer. But if you prefer to call, you can call us too. And again, this is all on the application, so it's available there. But you can also call us, whatever works. And when you're submitting your application, there are various ways that we'll accept it, so kind of choose whatever works best for you. Again, that information is also on the front page of the application, but You can email it to us. You can fax it to us. You can send it in the mail to us. You can also come over to our offices in Needham. We have a 24-hour blue drop box to the left of the building. So you can put it there anytime you want, and we check that daily. So whatever works for you, just get that application in, and yeah, that's it. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We hope to see your application soon, and have a good night.